welcome everybody to our next session. Welcome to everybody online who's watching. I'd like to introduce, please, Trina Bianchini and Jennifer Cousins for their presentation, please.
Thanks, Justin. So, hi everyone, I'm Trina.
And I'm Jen.
And we've got the tough gig right before lunch. So bear with us. We're going to do our very best to get you out on time. We've planned, we've practiced, so we should be right. So today we're here to present the UDL Quandary of Organisational Implementation. We're going to share our experience from the last 5 years of implementing UDL at TAFE SA, and would really like to take this opportunity to recognise the work and the collaboration of the many people at TAFE SA, and in particular our amazing colleagues in our teaching and learning team. So we'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land and encourage those online to acknowledge their lands that they are on today by entering that in the chat. It is a privilege to be sharing these lands on which we live, work and learn together. So today we will take you on the journey of cracking each nut in the shell with the nutcracker shown on the image, and tell you about our initial approach, our tools and strategies, our challenges, our successes and failures, the divide between educator and organisational practices, and UDL 3.0 and other influences such as the ASQA revised standards, fee-free TAFE, student success, diversity and neurodivergence, and we'll finish up with our reflections.
So just as a beginning sort of point of context, we started this journey back in 2007 when TAFE SA had a huge ASQA audit, which we failed successfully. And it took us into a 2-year period of remediation and a response to that audit. And at that time, we created 2 additional new teams to support our quality and our student support teams, and that was teaching and learning and a Centre for Educator Practice, to really address those issues and try to work through how we might be able to address those particular requirements. So coming on the back of that audit, we then had some legislative imperatives. We were also then had a claim against us in the Human Rights Commission about the accessibility of our online learning systems and design. And so we then spent 1.5 years working with the Human Rights Commission around how we were going to remediate those particular issues. And that was a very extensive process. And as always, TAFE across the country, I think, always has a very high social imperative around supporting students with very diverse needs, often in situations or in contexts in which smaller, more niche type of RTOs are unable to support those students. So we were recognising that we are getting increasing numbers of students identifying with a range of disabilities, but also starting to recognise in the pursuit of teaching that we had a lot of students who had undiagnosed or undisclosed things that were having huge impact on their learning and the way that we were actually teaching. So as a context, we had all that information. We knew we needed to do better. And just like the compass on the screen, we determined really that UDL was our best option to be our true north. That was the thing that we wanted to really guide everything that we did thereafter based on those learnings we'd already made in those contextual scenarios. So UDL then became a real focus for us as an organisation.
No, it's lost.
We're just gonna, there we go. As a result then of making that decision, we introduced the language of inclusion and UDL in as much as we can. Trina and I are both from the teaching and learning team at TAFE SA. So we looked at how are we going to present that language, and we created a language guide that could be used right across the organisation. And we really embedded the concepts of UDL in that language guide. Then we created and promoted training about inclusive teaching and learning and UDL. And we focused wholly on the idea that this was beneficial for all of our students. It was good teaching practice. We minimised and really avoided ever using the word disability or any other kind of specific need. We talked about the needs of all of our students and really socialised that idea. We then introduced a digital accessibility platform called Ally, and subsequently a system now called UDL through Panorama. And those systems actually provide students with opportunities to download their materials and their content in a format that suits them best. Subsequently, when Panorama was introduced, it provided that, but then also allowed the students to completely contextualise or customise the interface with our system to suit them. And that every time they then logged in, it allows them to have it in that format. So it really gave a lot more opportunity. Both of those systems also provided all of our educators, our learning designers, with full accessibility checking, guidelines and guidance about how to remediate things that were happening in that learning management system. So this was a really fabulous way for us to actually build UDL without having to explicitly say you're doing UDL. We were able to just explain to people how those things happened. We also developed a digital toolkit and a learning design planner, which tried to address a lot of those issues that we had recognised in those previous years, and that were really underpinned by accessibility, by the usability of what was happening for us, and then UDL as the other driver. And we highlighted from that Ally or Nuja platforms, we were able to identify where our really big hotspots, and we were able to create very specific inclusive learning design guidance. So things about descriptive URLs, having alt text, how you present images, how do you caption images, how do you fully automate as much of those accessibility features in our systems as possible. And then we co-designed across the organisation, including our student advisory group, educators, people from procurement, marketing, from all aspects of our organisation to develop an inclusive learning design teaching and learning roadmap, which really just gave us this concept of where are we headed. It doesn't have huge KPIs or any indicators. It really is just saying, here's the why. Here's what we want to do, why it's important, and what's the impact for the learners, and then how it can drive your practice. And then we created models and exemplars, and Trina and other people in the teaching learning team are working with TAFE New South Wales to create exemplars within the learning systems to show people what happens when you apply these things. So what it looks like before and what it looks like after, and why then do students benefit from those systems. And then in all of this time, we've been really claiming and lobbying for an organisational mandate about some basics. And so just recently, our leadership and management have agreed that for every unit of competency that we have at TAFE, that you have to have a online learning course, and that all the materials that you are going to use to do your teaching of that unit will be accessible, have a degree of usability, and have universal design for learning in it. So that has really helped us move to that next step.
I think I need to hand over the control of the thing. It really just does not work for me. There we go. See? Yeah, you want to keep it? So at the base of our roadmap is the TAFE SA Inclusive Education Framework. We're very proud of this. It is our commitment to provide inclusive education experiences, recognising individual strengths and capabilities, and accommodating individual learner requirements and removing barriers to participation. The framework showing on the screen is a triangle, and the words around the outside highlight that we are designing for inclusivity with consideration of diversity and also variability within the learner cohort. Inside the triangle are 3 pillars: accessibility, usability, and universal design for learning. If we apply these in our practice, we create the greatest opportunity for our learners to feel included. Accessibility at the base level is about ensuring the learning content available to students is accessible with all the things that Jen mentioned, including alternative text on images. But All of these things can, and therefore we meet the minimal legislative requirement, but it's much more than that. Resources can meet minimum accessibility checks, but still not be completely accessible as they're not usable. They need to be presented in a usable format. The content needs to be in manageable chunks, logical sequence, and needs to be easy to navigate for all users, including those using assistive technology. The programs delivered at TAFE SA are diverse. The student cohorts within those programs are diverse. We can look at the cohorts and do some work around the understanding of needs for specific demographics, but it is much harder to understand the variability and identify the barriers presenting to these learners in the environment. So we have implemented Universal Design for Learning as our true north, as it does give us the best chance of catering for all by providing options. Thank you. Yes, we've certainly worked our way through the maze showing on the screen. Our challenges have been many, so I'm just going to talk about a few. Firstly, individualised practice versus organisational practice. There is so often a disconnect between what the organisation was doing and wanting and what the educators were doing and wanting. We have a lack of a baseline when we started. We didn't really know what our starting point was or what would be our measures of success. And I have to say, we're still working on those measures of success and how to actually collate data to be able to present, as the previous presentation discussed. So we have basic checkpoints and some KPIs, but nothing mandated. Organisational buy-in is difficult. It is seen primarily as a teaching and learning team responsibility without the recognition that UDL and universal design specifically is required through all stages of the student experience. Training package interpretation. So for those of you from VET, understand that the criteria can be very specific. So there is a fear around how to push those boundaries with a fear that it's no longer going to be compliant. That is a really big challenge. And educator capability isn't necessarily fit for purpose. The VET requirements of a TAE Certificate 4 provides limited exposure to learning theories, educational pedagogy, and there is a minimal requirement to develop beyond the initial qualification. There are also challenges in ensuring that educator capability training embeds and models UDL. And that's become very clear through quite a few of the presentations at the conference. We then had the shift to UDL 3.0 and what that was potentially going to impact. Thank you. So as we mentioned, it's been a journey and we can clearly identify learnings along the way as indicated by the markers on the road in the image. For the organisation, it has meant big sell, big investment. Firstly, we found it is essential to link UDL initiatives with government policy and legislation to leverage commitment and funding. So the experiences that we had through the audit and also the human rights challenge has meant that we've been able to do that. Other drivers include the student experience, increased access and engagement to learning, increasing completion rates, reducing complaints, and culminating with TAFE SA being a training provider of choice. Co-design of our roadmap was key. We needed to better understand everybody's needs, values, and priorities, and we needed to establish what the barriers were and why addressing them mattered. And this was incredibly valuable, and we will do much more of this moving forward. Establishing the what and why is crucial and isn't easy. It's critical to get all business units on the same page before you start. Connectedness and consistency across the organisation. So we need leadership to be using the same principles to present information to teams and students. Student perspectives and data is also very important. Knowing and understanding what is important to them. We had access to data such as complaints, usage of Ally, which we're now using Panorama, but the ability to generate alternative formats, so understanding what was being generated and when, how. We have learning and learner analytics. We have feedback about courses, but we really only have some incidental feedback. So it's not enough. We know we need student involvement at each step of the journey to provide more explicit feedback around their learning experience so we can close the gap between what the data and the educators are telling us. We also learned that our approach has been limited to the teaching and learning team in academic development and not necessarily scaled across the organisation to the level that it needs to be. We've learned a lot about the journey of individual educators. The thoughtful expression shown on the face of this educator on the screen indicates it is a mindset process. Firstly, there is educator overwhelm, perceiving that they are always chasing their tails. It is necessary to persevere and wait for them to have the aha moment and then leverage from that. Educators need to see quick wins and be able to justify the change in practice. There is a perceived imbalance of what we are asking for and their perception of sweat equity and lack of time. The +1 principle is your really big achievable sell here in trying to get them on the journey. We must also nurture joy, just like the UDL consideration 7.3 in the 3.0 guidelines. It needs to engage and spark joy for educators for them to see the benefits.
And so what would we do differently now? A lot, I think. First, we would start with management and leadership and really getting that commitment from the outset. So if anyone's going on this journey, really make sure there is something tangible that you can anchor onto. So it needs to be explicit in your strategies, your plans, and it needs to be across the entire organisation. It can't be just sitting in a teaching and learning framework. Where the requirements need to also really, really embedded in procurement processes. If the resources, the learning environment, the technology, all of those areas aren't actually accessible in the first place, then you're never going to get there because you're always working against these things. So having built in checks and balances around those really important. We needed to also ensure that our project-based learning designers had the capability around accessibility, usability, and universal design for learning, because that's been a really hard sell in that area. And we recognise that there was often very low levels of capability around those things. We needed to involve students in the consultation and design right from the outset. Now, we had the student advisory group, but we probably needed to review a whole lot of perspectives around students, particularly those who weren't coming forward necessarily to say they were having issues. So who wasn't at the table that we were having discussions with, and how could we engage them? And we needed to have them along each step of that process, not just the consultation part, but right around the implementation, the reviewing and those types of things. And we also wanted to ensure around that educator training being inclusive. So we really should have got that commitment from our Centre of Educator Capability that they were going to align and uphold those principles and considerations at every step of the training they were doing, because you would be learning as you did other training and start to see those benefits and learn from yourself what an amazing experience UDL can be as a learner if you have that opportunity. So UDL 3.0, we were worried about this and the launch of the new framework, but for us, it changed from a challenge to a win. We were able to use the new 3.0 to really go back and review what we'd done. And in a wonderful and surprising way, our roadmap actually had really addressed a lot of these things, because we were coming very much from a design from the beginning kind of perspective and really trying to embed it in everything we were doing. So that was a very important kind of move for us. And there were a whole lot of other things around. The language was really fantastic, much more engaged for our educators, simpler, and really much more explicit about the call to arms. So really thinking then about, for us, the concepts of what's also coming in terms of the ASQA VET standards are changing in July, but they're really greater focus on what's happening for the students in quality areas 1 and 2. and about how the training needs to be much more engaging and responsive to learner needs, and that we need to embed those things more specifically in the way we deliver and I guess design our training and work with the students from that perspective. For us, the big aha moment in the launch of 3.0 was really having access to the school-wide implementation criteria. This has been around for a little while, but it became more explicit in the 3.0, and this sits very closely aligned. And you can see from the 4 categories, we were coming very much from teaching and learning. We had some of our professional development was addressing it, but not enough. And it's taken us a long time to get that kind of mandate from leadership and management. And that's what we believe will really start to build that culture and environment that is UDL. So we really recognise how important the buy-in at each of those sort of pillars and how they've got to work together to achieve those things.
So our new focus points for further development and implementation: firstly, encouraging the mindset shift. We're not fixing the student, we are responding to their needs. Recognising that barriers and solutions are multifaceted. Addressing our individual and institutional biases and recognising how we might be creating additional barriers. VET training packages are often not written in an inclusive way and inherently present biases and barriers. So we're going to spend some more time looking into those. VET providers also inadvertently create barriers, in particular when they're trying to respond to a range of imperatives, such as the funding entry requirements and social initiatives such as Fee Free TAFE. Educators also have their own bias with their own previous industry roles. As educators, we often have biases to reading and writing, physical versus digital, group work versus independent and pairs, and producing valid evidence of learning and knowing. So there's a need to consider this in terms of use of scaffolds, alternative forms of assessment, and honouring this in our materials, teaching and learning methods, assessments, and environments. The ability to articulate why flexibility might not be available, for example, the true inherent requirements, which we suspect are very minimal. Honouring and valuing a wide variety of communication, action, interaction, and expression, and valuing forms of expression that have been historically silenced or ignored, such as narrative and alternative languages. And actively challenging exclusionary practices to build more accessible, inclusive spaces and systems and approaches to teaching and learning. We reflect and look in our side view mirror at the road travelled, like in the picture, we can say this work is not easy. There is a need to be robust enough to adapt to changes, a need to be patient, resilient, and have stickability, and to be willing to adapt to the pace of adoption, and it doesn't move at the pace of individuals' passions. There is also a need to be able to recognise there are a million moving parts and they all need to work together to achieve the outcomes. But it's not all bad. There are moments that matter, and you must celebrate the small wins, leverage every opportunity, and promote collaboration at all levels. Stay sane through your people, find your tribe, which for us has been the Universal Design for Learning in Tertiary Education community of practice. So thank you, and I don't know that we have much time left for questions. Oh, we do? Oh, brilliant, brilliant. Excellent. Thank you.
That would help. Thank you very much, Trina and Jennifer. We've got a couple of questions from Slido. First of all, you touched on student co-design, and there's a question that goes to, do you have a feedback mechanism to implement student voice? Is there anything else you can share?
Yep, we do. We have numerous feedback mechanisms. There's the NCVR, like the Learner Engagement Survey, which goes out across all RTOs. but in every Learn course, there is a feedback mechanism at the end of each course. And we are now implementing something called a prompt, which sets off an automatic reminder to students to actually complete that feedback. So that's the second opportunity. And we are just about to try to get more of that conversational feedback with students. So one of the things that we're thinking about doing is the learning intent statements at the beginning of classes and beginning of teaching, and then talking to students about what's working for them, and then bringing that feedback back. So that's the next project. So watch this space, maybe talk about that next year.
Thank you. That's fantastic. The next one, I had a bit of an idea about this too. I was thinking what you have been through with your organisation, opportunity through adversity. So you've really taken that on and made great gains. The question is, do you think your organisation would have gone on this journey without the push from, glasses would help, from the human rights complaint or the ASQA wrist slap? What do you recommend for vet institutions and RTOs who didn't have these circuit breakers?
Well, let them know that they do happen and you may find yourself in that position. So I think definitely that's a driver, and that's why we say you need to leverage off those things, because that is the imperative that gives you the funding and the time and the recognition. But at the same time, it's about finding the passionate individuals. I think the numbers at this conference and the growth of UDL is about finding those who are using it and seeing the improvement and building on that and getting that internal educator. And once students have experienced it, they want to know in the next class they went to why that's not in it there. So that's another driver.
And I was just going to say, when we introduced the Ally and then subsequently Panorama, we didn't really even advertise it to the students. A little video got popped into their orientation module just to explain, you know, what this system is, how it works. And we were absolutely floored within weeks, the number of students who were already just engaging with that technology and supporting their own learning without having to be really explicit about that. And I think then that's proved to us that it was worth going on the journey. So that's been a big driver too, being able to show educators how engaged their own students are when they're given opportunities to have those tools.
Thank you. Okay, next question from Jacinta through Slido. You mentioned the challenge in managing the accreditation requirements and finding the flexibility and or multiple modes of engagement. I can see this burden being heavily weighted on the educator and the individual efforts. How did you support them in this process? Did you go up the power chain?
I think from now, everything we do is related to accessibility and UDL. So our learning design planner has like a shell for our LMS with all those executive functioning type tools and different opportunities for engagement built in. So educators are encouraged and now mandated with checks and balances kicking in to see that they've followed that shell. So they're actually building those kinds of things in. So that's one way that we can support with that. And the recognition of the experience, the learner experience, has meant that we have had buy-in from above for that. So I hope that answers that question. Yeah.
I was just thinking about, like, I guess in the vet sector, compliance is always such a big driver. And over the past 10 years, probably, it's been even more so. And I think there's a fear there about getting that wrong. And if you're like us, a fear of bringing your whole organisation down. And, you know, that has got to be, we've got to get rid of the fear. And we've got to build capability across our sector, including with our quality assurance people, that we can be flexible, we can stretch those boundaries and still have valid, authentic assessment, but in a way that meets the students' needs. So it's really about building that confidence and capability. And I think UDL offers us that opportunity to do that.
Yeah. So we've done a lot of work around our learning resources and the actual learner experience, but now we need to reflect on assessment and start to look at bringing that flexibility in through the assessment process. So for anyone that's interested, I'll do a sell from the gallery presentation last night to join a Universal Design for Learning community practice for VET assessment, where we can start gathering other ideas about what people are doing and, you know, really sharing this work. As I've said, the UDL tertiary education community practice has been amazing in sharing ideas and actual practical ways of and celebrating wins. So being able to unpack some, you know, typical assessments across different VET RTOs would be amazing. So anyone that's interested, come and see me and I'll give you the QR code to join in.
And look, I'm sorry, I know there's a question from the room.
There's one
somewhere.
down the back.
Sorry about that. Meredith.
Thank you. Hi, thanks for sharing your journey. It's really important to hear how institutions have been going about this and experiencing it. I was wondering how many students have been involved?
Well, involved in I mean, actually,
In terms of when you were talking about collecting data from students on what you were building.
Yeah, so though the students, every student at TAFE SA has the opportunity to participate in at least two, like the once a year major feedback survey, which all goes out to all students, but also within every Learn course, there is the opportunity to participate and give feedback. But that hasn't been taken up as well as we would hope in all cases. So now the push is to promote that and to actually, that's why, you know, talking to them about how they're learning,
it's really
and
hard.
then getting the feedback of, well, did that work for you? So engaging them that way.
Yeah.
So every student has that opportunity, but
if
you know,
it helps, because you're about to,
yeah,
you keep on going. There's some really good research coming out on the purpose of student data in this space, and there's quite an interesting argument around us perhaps not spending as much time in that realm as we think we should be, because we're finding some significant research projects are coming out with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students, where that data might be even more valuable for you to use, because in institutions our flow of students is changing, and because of the number of factors that impact their experience of learning, so many that we absolutely can't control, that sometimes if we're only using those smaller pools that we can get, and we're trying our best to get them, and I hear you, are only reflecting certain needs, and they don't end up being the needs of all students. That's why I was curious about how you're going.
So it'll be about introducing, changing the practice, talking about the intent, and then unpacking that to see what's worked and what hasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll need to wind up now. Sorry about that. But thank you to Jennifer and Trina.
Thank you.